Hunker down and stay home. That's the message from the Prime Minister as the country heads into the final 24 hours before nationwide lockdown begins. It will be 4 weeks minimum before the restrictions lift for New Zealanders. And for those travelling overseas who haven't already got on a plane, it is likely that the window has now closed. For those trying to get home within the country, the government has just announced flights, trains and ferries will keep running until midnight Friday. Here's political reporter Moir.
The government is continuing to roll out cash to cushion New Zealanders ahead of the lockdown and reassure those who are struggling with bills there will be extra help. Last week, $12.1 billion was announced for businesses and beneficiaries, and over the days since, money has been allocated for individual industries like aviation and Māori health services like whānau ora to boost the people most in need. Today, the Finance Minister Grant Robertson announced a mortgage repayment holiday scheme for homeowners.
Retail banks have agreed to offer a 6-month mortgage repayment holiday to homeowners whose incomes have been affected by Covid-19. This is a similar scheme to that which has been offered in Australia.
The government's also implementing a $6.25 billion scheme for small and medium-sized businesses to protect jobs and support the economy through this unprecedented time.
The scheme will include a limit of $500,000 per loan and would apply to firms with a turnover of between $250,000 and $80 million per annum.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she's working on harsher isolation penalties for New Zealanders travelling back from overseas, likely in the form of monitored quarantine. For those who haven't got home yet, the window is likely already shut.
It's one thing, of course, to have Air New Zealand available to make flights. It is another if they have no ability to land in order to make that transit route an option. And going forward, there will be people who we simply just won't, even through our best efforts, be able to bring home.
The 4-week lockdown will mean forced quality time with loved ones. And for those who are on their own, Jacinda Ardern says there's an exemption, but with conditions.
If you live alone, but you have one person you have contact with, it needs to be just that, a person you stay faithful to and they stay faithful to you in turn.
She says anyone who socialises with people outside their bubble will ruin it for others and almost certainly ensure a longer period of national lockdown. Another exemption being made is for those domestically trying desperately to get home in time for the lockdown at midnight tomorrow. Passengers will now be able to use flights, ferries and trains until midnight on Friday. Those in New Zealand on various temporary work and visitor visas that expire in the next month or so will receive extensions. The government is still furiously working through the specifics of what businesses will be deemed essential services during the lockdown. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment's Deputy Chief Executive, Paul Stocks, says if businesses haven't already been told they're essential, then they probably aren't.
We are working through those firms that will be required or allowed to remain open. I would caution firms from leaping to judgments about what their status will be before they have received an adjudication from the government.
The warehouse has been saying it will remain open, but the Prime Minister has crushed that.
But don't, for instance, expect to be able to go to your local warehouse.
With schools closing today, the Secretary of Education, Iona Holstead, says plans are rolling out to make sure as many students have what they need to keep learning at home.
We'll be pleased to connect with teachers interested in working with us. And we're sourcing devices and working through the logistics of getting them to students that need them. We're also working through issues where access to the internet is needed, and while this is a big and complex project, we are making progress.
And she says people working for essential services could bring someone else to look after children at home, as long as that person does not have other contacts other than their own family.
If they identify a trusted buddy, as long as they're not elderly or vulnerable in other ways, and if that person is identified as part of your self-isolated group, they become the child's caregiver. However, it is critical that that buddy cannot then have other contacts other than their own household. You all become one group, but it should be a tight group.
For Parliament, a small group of MPs will meet tomorrow to invoke a state of emergency and pass crucial legislation, and will then adjourn for almost 5 weeks. The National Party leader Simon Bridges will chair a cross-party committee to scrutinise the government's response that will have a majority of opposition MPs.
The parliamentary oversight will ensure that the government improves and lifts its game. I don't say that as a criticism, I simply mean that scrutiny, I think, can make for a stronger overall response for our nation.
Jacinda Ardern is now preparing to hunker down herself, with her own small bubble consisting of her family, a few staff and Grant Robertson.
People cannot expect it to be life as normal because it won't be for a period of time, and that's so we can keep this period as short as possible. If we're successful, the shorter this period of self-isolation for all of us will be.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Moir.